EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is the Hollywood ending, the Matthew Tinling story. Chapter 1. The film is in his head. It's late. It's after midnight, in a supported housing unit on Fermoy Road in Maida Vale, West London. A concrete building made for the broken and the nearly repaired. It's a place that smells of disinfectant, sweat, and probably reheated curry. And behind one door, Unit 5A, a blue light flickers across the walls. A TV left on. Saw 6. The movie's antagonist, Jigsaw, is lecturing another trembling victim. The rules are simple, he says, his voice distorted through static. Live or die. Make your choice. Even though it's number 6 in the franchise, it was a huge hit. Matthew Tinling sits inches from the screen, transfixed. He's 25 years old, pale and gaunt, his eyes glassy with the stillness of obsession. And somewhere in that thin space between fantasy and motive, he's taking notes, mentally reconstructing every game, every moral choice, every punishment dressed up as redemption. Down the hall, his roommate, Richard Hamilton, age 45, sleeps restlessly. Hamilton's story is a familiar one in London's shelters. Former addict, struggling to stay clean, scraping by on benefits, still hopeful that life might one day forgive him. But the walls in Maida Vale are thin, and Tingling's television never sleeps. People who lived there later said Tinling was off. He was paranoid, he was volatile. He paced the hallway muttering about justice. He told neighbors that Hamilton owed him money, for rent, for cigarettes, or something more abstract, something moral, the kind of debt you can't pay back in cash. And in that dimly lit room, Saw 6 became scripture. The film's theme, punishment through purification, logged in Tingling's brain like a splinter. He talked about it openly. You only learn through pain, he would say. To him, the movie wasn't horror. It was instruction. Days before the killing, Tinling asked staff about tests, some kind of tests. He told a neighbor, I could make someone understand what they've done if they had to feel it. Now, most brushed this off. This was supported housing. People said strange things all the time. But there was something different about the way he said, understand. It was slow and deliberate, like the word itself was a threat. Hamilton, meanwhile, was slipping. He'd relapsed briefly, then promised to get clean again. He was trying to pay off debts, scraping what he could. He even joked with staff that living with Tinling was its own horror film. They laughed, but he didn't. In the early morning hours of April 7th, 2012, the argument started over money. £240 in rent. Tinling demanded Hamilton's bank card. Hamilton refused. It was a small, human disagreement that should have ended with slammed doors and silent, bubbling resentment. Instead, it ended with 17 stab wounds. When police reconstructed the scene, they found patterns in the violence. Nothing random. It was methodical. Each strike targeted nerve clusters, arteries, and finally, the spine. Tinling had tried to sever Hamilton's spinal cord, mirroring a scene directly from Saw 6, a trap in which paralysis is the ultimate punishment. After the attack, Tinling set fire to the apartment, the flames curling up the wallpaper, consuming Hamilton's remains. Then he left, calmly, almost ritualistically, taking Hamilton's bank card with him. Within hours, he was seen on security cameras, withdrawing cash to then go buy crack cocaine. When detectives arrested him days later, Tinling was still high, still talking about that test that he wouldn't elucidate. He told officers that Hamilton didn't deserve to live, that it wasn't murder, it was justice, that he was just playing a game. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't Saw 6. This was Maida Vale, a place meant for second chances, turned into a film set for cruelty. And Matthew Tinling was all at the same time director, audience, and leading man, blurring the line between script and sin. And if you're finding this story hard to believe so far, don't. It happened, and it only gets worse from here. Chapter 2. The game begins. The fire department got a call to respond to smoke at Fermoy Road, flames, possible structural damage, and unknown casualties. So by dawn, Maida Vale was choking on the smell of burnt flesh and melted plastic. The building's residents, many half asleep, some half stoned, were left standing barefoot on the curb, wrapped in blankets distributed by paramedics. One of them kept whispering, "That's Richard's room." When the firefighters broke through the charred door of Unit 5A, they found what was left of Richard Hamilton on the living room floor. His body blackened and twisted, surrounded by pools of congealed blood baked into the carpet. The forensic pathologist would later call it one of the most violent overkills he'd ever documented. But the blood told a story that fire couldn't erase. There were 17 stab wounds, each deliberate, each positioned to cause maximum pain before death. The pattern simply wasn't random. The first slashes targeted the torso and arms, disabling defense. Then came the throat. And finally, a knife plunged downward at the base of the neck, severing the tissue near the spinal column. The autopsy report confirmed it. Tinling had attempted to sever Hamilton's spinal cord, precisely as depicted in Saw 6. That scene, where a man's nerves are cut to make him, quote, see the truth, had become Tinling's manual. Investigators pieced together the timeline quickly. Around midnight, the argument erupted over Hamilton's bank card. Tinling demanded it for rent money he claimed was owed. Neighbors heard shouting, a crash, and then nothing. At 1:12 a.m., smoke alarms went off. By 1:15, Tinling was already gone, caught on a street-level security camera walking calmly away with a black duffel bag. Inside was the murder weapon, a kitchen knife from their shared drawer. What he did next cemented motive beyond any psychological plea. Less than an hour after the killing, Tinling used Hamilton's ATM card at a Barclays cash machine, withdrawing £240. The footage shows him glancing at the camera, expressionless, the flame reflection still visible in his pupils. Minutes later, he bought crack cocaine from a dealer in nearby Paddington. This wasn't a sudden frenzy. It was a process. Tinling had thought about it, planned it, rehearsed it. Prosecutors would later argue that he directed the entire event like a movie. The difference between a film and a murder was that the screaming didn't stop when the credits rolled. By mid-morning, fire investigators ruled the blaze arson. The accelerant had been poured around the body. A poor attempt to destroy evidence. Just the kind of cinematic thinking that ignores how real fire behaves. They found melted remnants of a DVD case on the coffee table. Yep, Saw 6. Next to it, a mug half full of instant coffee and a burned notebook page scrawled with the word test. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police Homicide and Serious Crime Command were called in. One of them, later quoted anonymously, said, quote, "He didn't just kill the man, he staged it, like he wanted someone to find it and understand the message." 3 days later, they arrested Matthew Tinling at a squat in Kilburn. He was coming down from a crack binge, disoriented, but talkative. When detectives asked if he knew why he was there, he smirked. "Because I failed the game," he added, almost proudly. "I was the teacher and the student." In his first police interview, he admitted the stabbing but denied intent to kill. He said he only wanted to make Hamilton, quote, learn. He described Saw 6 as a moral film, explaining that pain is clarity. Investigators noted his calm tone, his total lack of remorse. When pressed about the fire, Tinling said he needed to cleanse the scene. He spoke about purification, about giving Hamilton a chance to start over on another level. But the detective stopped him mid-sentence and asked, "Did you enjoy it?" Tinling smiled. "Well, you enjoy your job, don't you?" Back at Maida Vale, the supported housing unit, the other residents couldn't sleep for weeks. They said the smell never left the hallway. The staff bleached the walls, they replaced the carpet, but the scorch marks crawled up the plaster like veins. A counselor described the atmosphere as radioactive guilt. Everyone felt contaminated, not just by the crime, but by the realization that they'd lived beside it. When the tabloids broke the story, they all leaned on the same phrase: Saw fan kills roommate. It was catchy, it was cinematic, but the truth was uglier. This wasn't fandom. It was a man finding identity in someone else's nightmare. Tinling's trial would begin months later at the Old Bailey courthouse. But in that moment, sitting handcuffed in a gray interrogation room, he was still talking about rules. Rules that existed nowhere but in his own head. Chapter 3. Lessons in Fire and Blood. Every crime scene tells a story, and sometimes that story's written in fire. At Fermoy Road, the blaze Tinling set did more than destroy. It revealed. When the flames stripped away the walls, investigators could see the layout like a diagram. The burn patterns, the points of ignition, the blackened trails of accelerant on the carpet leading straight to the body of Richard Hamilton. Fire investigator Alan Fennell described it as staged chaos. The flames were lit in 3 separate points, one at the door, one near the sofa, and one directly under the body. Tinling hadn't poured gasoline to escape detection. He'd poured it like punctuation, a signature. By mid-April, the Metropolitan Police Homicide Command had reconstructed Tinling's every move. The security footage was damning. He left Maida Vale at 1:15 a.m., walked west through Paddington, stopped at a Barclays ATM, and withdrew 240 pounds using Hamilton's card. Within 20 minutes, he'd exchanged it for crack cocaine. 2 hours later, he was seen on another camera, laughing with a dealer under a railway bridge. By dawn, Hamilton's apartment was gone, engulfed, extinguished, erased. Tinling wasn't hiding. He wasn't even running. He was drifting, high, self-satisfied, convinced that he'd won the game. And when detectives arrested him at that squat in Kilburn, he didn't ask why. He asked whether Saw 7 had come out yet. He told officers that he'd been, quote, testing someone who failed to learn. And when they mentioned Hamilton's death, Tinling said something that chilled even the veterans. He didn't pass his test. He was meant to lose. And it wasn't metaphor. He meant it literally. During interrogation, he explained that the Saw films were philosophical, that they taught people about consequences, that every person who suffered in the film had earned it. He said he believed Hamilton had betrayed him, had refused to share, refused to be honest, and therefore needed to understand the value of pain. In interrogation, the detective asked, "And the spinal cord, why did you target that?" Tinling responded, "Because it's clean. He wouldn't feel it after that. It's humane." Humane. He used the word humane. The autopsy revealed Hamilton had defensive wounds. He tried to fight back, but his injuries were too severe. So the blade entered between the vertebrae, severing the lower cervical nerves. He was still conscious when the fire began. In the days that followed, more journalists seized on the story. The tabloids began calling it the Saw murder. Headlines screamed about movie maniac kills for rent. But again, the truth was uglier than imitation. This was aspiration. He didn't copy the film because he couldn't tell fantasy from reality. He copied it because he wanted it to be real. He wanted to live inside its logic. Pain as purity, violence as virtue. The psychiatric reports painted a complicated picture. Tinling had a history of schizoaffective disorder and crack addiction. He'd been in and out of treatment, arrested for minor assaults, and repeatedly described as, quote, unpredictable, but coherent. So he wasn't delusional in the legal sense. He was deliberate. When he said it's not murder, it's a lesson, he believed it. That belief was his defense. Prison psychologists later noted that Tinling spoke about morality like a director storyboarding a scene. He used cinematic language. He used framing and edits and dialogue and blocking. He described the killing not as violence, but as a sequence. He even joked that if Jigsaw had been real, he'd have been proud of him. In another context, he could have been a filmmaker. But instead of a camera, he chose a kitchen knife. Instead of actors, he used himself and the people around him. And instead of a script, he just repurposed Saw 6. At the Old Bailey, prosecutors would later show jurors the film, side by side with crime scene photos. And the similarities were undeniable. The lesson, the spinal cut, even the post-crime fire, a symbolic cleansing. Tinling didn't flinch when they showed it. He smiled. For him, it was like a premiere, his own movie, at last, projected to an audience. But behind that smile was something deeper. An emptiness that had learned to mimic purpose. And that's what addiction does. That's what obsession does. It gives chaos structure, and it makes evil look organized. As the trial loomed, one detective put it bluntly. He wasn't insane, he was inspired. And that distinction between madness and meaning, that would decide how long Matthew Tinling would spend behind bars. This has been The Devil Within, the Hollywood ending, the Matthew Tinling story. Follow, rate, share the show. Your support keeps the stories alive. And you can explore more from EVO Creative, Criminal Mischief, Taboo Treasures, The Devil's Ledger, and The Ides of April. Visit evocreative.com and follow The Devil Within Pod on Instagram. Our sponsors make this show possible. Quince, luxury essentials at honest prices. Go to quince.com/devilwithin. Mint Mobile, premium wireless for $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/devilwithin. ExpressVPN, protect your data everywhere. expressvpn.com/devilwithin. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan. Until next time, stay safe out there.